What is going on, White Sox fans? My name is Michael Suareo, and welcome to the second episode of the Pipeline to 35th, a monthly show presented by Sox On 35th, where we keep you up to date on what is going on in the White Sox farm system. We've got a really fun show coming for you today. In just a few minutes, I'm going to be joined by Future Sox's Elijah Evans, where we are going to be covering everything that's been going on at the Double-A level with the Birmingham Barons, who have by far the most exciting team in this White Sox organization, including the White Sox probably. But before we get to that, we've had a few MLB promotions come this past month. Most recently, we saw Brian Ramos make his debut with the Chicago White Sox, getting promoted from the Double-A Barons. It was a bit of a surprising promotion to see, but if you look at it, he is the only healthy infield option on the 40-man roster right now, and with Danny Mendick hitting the IL, he was really the only option to promote without having to go through a bunch of roster maneuvers. So, I mean, his first game, he got his first RBI, he got his first MLB hit, didn't look half bad. Hopefully he can make it a difficult decision on the White Sox when they have to decide what to do when Mendick comes off the IL. Other than that, we also saw two pitchers make their MLB debut in Nick Nastrini and Jonathan Cannon. Both of them had pretty good first start, followed by iffy second starts after that, and both are now back with the Charlotte Knights in their rotation. I know a lot of people would argue that it would be better off to leave them in the White Sox rotation and let them learn and develop at the MLB level. That is not the direction that the White Sox want to go at the moment. They want to fill their rotation with veterans. Possibly they're trying to get some of these veterans to accumulate some trade value so they can get something for them by the summer, and then we'll see guys like Nastrini and Cannon and maybe others join the rotation down the road. Unfortunately, it's just not the direction they're going right now, that they're going to put some of these young guys in the rotation right now, but they'll be back this season. So it is what it is right now, but we will see more of Nick Nastrini, Jonathan Cannon, and others in the not too distant future. But other than that it's been, an interesting April for the Chicago White Sox, to say the least. Again, the Birmingham Barons have been the most exciting team in this system. I mean, they have the best record in all of Double-A. They're first place. They have, pretty much an all-star roster, considering the rest of the Double-A league. And they've just been on a tear pitching-wise. Their lineup's been great. Everything about this team has been phenomenal. So without further ado, let's bring on Elijah so that we could talk more about this team. All right, now joining me on the Pipeline to 35th, if you have not been following him and you are trying to keep up with what's going on in the White Sox farm system, I don't know what you're doing, because this guy's been killing it throughout the offseason into the 2024 season. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elijah Evans. Elijah, how are you doing, my man?
Appreciate it, Michael. I'm doing good. Thank you for the warm welcome, and I'm excited to just talk some ball. I'm enjoying, a weekend of White Sox minor league baseball, even a few good games at the major league level, which is a nice surprise. And I'm just, fired up about this system. We're a month in, and things are feeling good right now.
Yeah, dude, I've been watching too many games on MiLB.tv just to distract me from what's going on with the White Sox. But all of a sudden, the last week or so, they're actually not looking like a horrible team, so I can actually watch them again.
Yeah.
It feels like a normal season finally.
Yeah, it helps.
So before we get into anything else, we had some news break this weekend, and he just made his MLB debut. Your guy, James Fox, actually initially broke the news that Brian Ramos has been promoted to the White Sox from the Double-A Birmingham Barons. So it might just be a temporary roster fix, but his first game, he didn't look too bad. Got his first hit, got his first RBI. What were your thoughts when it was announced that he was going to be getting promoted?
Yeah, so my initial thought, right, was like it's probably a result of the 40 man. I think I've talked about this all kind of off season and everything. Like the current 40 man roster is in a really weird spot. It's just not in a very comfortable position. They've already DFA'd 10 guys this season, probably in the month, right? So that was kind of my initial thought. And it is a little bit of a rushed kind of promotion. But I think ultimately at the same time, like this is a guy who spent over a year in Birmingham now, and he has the ability to contribute and at least provide some life. And we saw that today in his first start, right? I watched him. I mean, the sac fly, a single up the middle. Like this is a guy who's going to put together at bats where you can see the upside. So it's a little bit rushed. It feels like more of a circumstantial promotion, but at the same time, like I love Brian Ramos. He's a great dude. He's a great player. I think he's got a lot of upside. I think also it helps that he kind of was just finding his groove this past week or two in Birmingham, right? A really tough start to the season. His timing wasn't there. He started to look like the Brian Ramos of last season in the last week or two. So if you're going to promote him somewhat early, it helps that he was just starting to heat up at least.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I was kind of surprised when the minor league rosters were announced and he was still in Double-A,
Yeah.
especially with Colson Montgomery joining the Triple-A roster, and he had less time in Double-A than Ramos did. I was kind of surprised that he was still at that level. And you said it too. He kind of got off to a rough start, but over his last 8 or so games at the Double-A level, he had an OPS over 1,000. He was really looking like the Brian Ramos that we all know as a prospect that has the potential to be an impact middle of the order bat in any lineup. So also like he's a very mature hitter at the plate too. Like he's always been one who he doesn't strike out a ton. He draws his fair share of walks. He's willing to work counts. So he's not the type of hitter where he's mashing, but he's got this 30% walk or strikeout rate and 2% walk rate, and he's going to get exposed at the major league level. He's someone that is capable of waiting for his pitch, and I do think that that's something that will help him in the long run. You're right. The 40 man roster, though, it's in a really weird spot. Obviously, Lenyon Sosa was probably the first option to get called up, but he's on the IL now. So unless they wanted to DFA someone, this was the natural option. But
Yeah, and like you pointed to about like his style of hitting, right? That was kind of the trouble with him early this season, right? Like 28 strikeouts in 24 games is not like him. Like it's definitely higher than we're used to seeing from him, right? So then the last week you see him start to find his pitches a little bit more. He had 2 home runs in Birmingham this past week. He was starting to look like he was a little more selective. His timing was there a little bit better. He's waiting for some of those pitches. This is a guy who's always, it's not a traditional hitter, right? He's always done a lot of damage on breaking balls, which is not common for a lot of young hitters, especially. But Ramos is a guy who can attack those pitches and sees when they're hanging a little bit and is really good at adapting to that. And you saw that today. His first major league hit was a slider that sat over the middle. It was a little bit flat. He lined it right back up the middle. So like that's the type of hitter he is. He's going to find your mistakes and he's going to hit them for line drives all over the field, which is what is so exciting from him. And beyond that, right? Like even if it's a little bit of a rushed promotion, this is a guy who is like the ultimate energy guy. I spent a week in Birmingham last year, and like Brian Ramos was the glue of that like core. He just has that energy to him. He's positive. He's happy. He's always smiling. And before the game, after the game, whatever it is, he's really good at communicating with a lot of the Spanish players. And that's something that I think people don't really see that, right? And don't think about like the atmosphere of like the energy of guys, right? But this is a guy who worked incredibly hard to learn English. Like he speaks pretty fluent English now. And when 2, 3 years ago, he barely did. And that made him in Birmingham the guy who can kind of be the bridge between some of the American players and some of the international players, which is the coolest thing to me, to see someone who can take on that kind of leadership role at 21 years old and say, 22 now, and say, I can be helpful for some of these Spanish guys to understand some of what the English guys are saying and vice versa, which is a really cool atmosphere aspect of his game.
yeah, I mean, just from seeing him briefly on TV the last couple of days, like you can tell he's got that energy behind him. And then just looking at or going on social media, seeing how many people were so pumped for him to get that promotion, like it was a really cool thing. Like you could tell his teammates genuinely enjoyed their time with him, and that he's just such a likable guy and just an easy guy to root for, man.
100%.
But we could talk about Brian Ramos all day, but I think we should transition into the guys that are actually still on the Birmingham roster now. So, which that Birmingham roster is like a freaking all-star team right now. Like they got so many guys that are in the White Sox top 30 prospects list, that guys that we know are going to be on the roster within the next year or 2 years or in the not too distant future. And at the top of that list is the headliner for the Dylan Cease trade, Drew Thorpe. He has just been killing it at the Double-A level. I want to hear your thoughts on Drew Thorpe and your opinion on a conversation that's been going around on social media about him. Everyone pretty much agrees that he's shown enough at the Double-A level. Do you think that he should be called up to Triple-A, or could he even slot into the White Sox rotation right now?
Yeah, Thorpe has been awesome. Like when he came over in the trade, I was like, this is good. I don't love it as a headliner. That's what my gut told me because I don't necessarily see the ace upside. But in all honesty, like I feel like I was wrong in that assessment. I don't think he's an ace, but that doesn't mean he's not a good headliner because this guy's floor is one of the highest I've seen from any pitcher in minor league baseball this year and even in the past few years. Like this is a major league pitcher. Like there's very few guys you can look at in the minor leagues and say like this guy will pitch in the major leagues for many years. Like that's Drew Thorpe. I am pretty dang confident about that. And when you watch him pitch, you see a guy who understands his game. He's not trying to be anybody else. He's not trying to be better or different than what he is. He understands the way he pitches better than almost anybody I've seen pitch in minor league baseball. And he's able to locate all over the zone and he's able to force guys into at bats and into swings that they're not comfortable with. And that's something that at his age is incredibly impressive and makes him pretty big league ready. Like I think that's a pretty fair assessment to say, like, is this guy need to be in Charlotte? Like, I don't really think so. I mean, I think there's a case to be made that, like, sure, you give him a few games there. I know it's a hitter-friendly place, but you give him a few games and you just make sure that he's ready to face some of those big league level hitters because, in AAA, you're going to face guys that are, have major league experience and they've done that and they've been there. But at the same time, like, he's pretty ready, Michael. I don't know. I don't know if I see a reason to have him at the next level. He's gonna be solid. He's not gonna be amazing. I don't know if he's gonna have he's probably not gonna have a 1.2 ERA at any of the next levels, right? But this is a guy who doesn't walk people at all. He commands the zone. He still generates plenty of whiffs with that changeup and especially with the slider too. And then he's able to pinpoint an average fastball all over the zone, which makes up for the fact that it's not a plus fastball, right? Like I think part of the concern and some of the things I saw about him post-trade was like, oh, this is a guy that doesn't have a great fastball. He sits in the low to mid 90s and he's not going to blow guys by. He's not going to have an overpowering fastball, but it's got a lot of vertical movement. He pinpoints it all over the zone, the top corners especially. He's great at putting his fastballs up there. And then you pair that with one of the best changeups you'll see and two variations of a slider that both work very effectively, and he's able to move them all over the zone, right? So it's just a really deep bag. It's consistency, it's command, and it's a guy who at the very least will be a solid MLB starter. And that's something that's really valuable.
I couldn't agree more with anything you just said there. I could make the argument that he's more advanced right now than Nick Nastrini is, and Nick Nastrini just made his pro debut.
Yep.
I mean, his ability to command the strike zone and locate his pitches with pinpoint accuracy is crazy.
Yeah.
And you said to yourself, one of the best changeups, maybe arguably the best changeup in minor league baseball right now. I mean, this season has been incredible. He's been so much better than advertised. I'm kind of on the fence on whether I think he should be promoted to AAA or if he could go straight to the Major League roster. For everything you said, I totally understand the argument for why he could just join the Major League roster. And honestly, I think I kind of lean that way too.
Yeah.
But there is one stat that I look at with him, and it makes me a little nervous that maybe we shouldn't rush him, and that's his home run per fly ball rate. It's at like a minuscule 3 point something percent, which the average is about 10%. And if you look at his xFIP, which is just his field independent numbers that show what his ERA should be, but xFIP goes a step further and normalizes home run per fly ball rate. If you look at that, if that number was normalized, that says his ERA should be more in the low threes, which again, still phenomenal. I mean, he's killing it at the level. But I don't even know if I for sure think that he should do this, but I do wonder if there could be a lesson to be learned from going from the Barons field, which is pretty pitcher friendly to Charlotte's field, which is just a freaking launching pad.
Yeah.
And just maybe there's a lesson to be learned there that when he does make a mistake, that a more
Right.
advanced hitter is going to take it yard because they will at that field. But at the same time, he doesn't make that many mistakes. So I don't even know
Yeah.
if that's worth it.
Yeah, it's tough. I
So,
think you could even I'm not opposed to it. I don't think it's gonna harm him either way. I just think like at some point, like why waste bullets? Like let's get this guy to the league because he's gonna be solid. Like it's like he's not gonna get I just I can't see him being a pitcher. Like, Nostrini's debut was great. Second start was really rough. Same thing with Cannon. Had a really solid debut, was really rough after that. I don't see Thorpe being a guy that gets smacked around 2-3 starts in a row. Like I think once he gets up, I think you're getting a decent start from him pretty much every game you see him, which is like that's something the White Sox like. Do the White Sox have that from anybody? I mean, maybe Eric Fetty is the one guy you can say you're getting at least a solid start every game, right? Like Crochet looks good, but he's had a few blowups for sure, and like that's kind of the way he pitches. I do expect Crochet to still get blown up sometimes, and I think beyond that, there's really nobody, right? So it's like if Thorpe's a guy that you can pencil in a solid start from any given day, I want that guy in Chicago sooner than later because why not? And I get that it's like one of the things with all these young pitchers that I keep coming back to is like, yes, I understand this year is not a year you're going to win and it's not a year you're focused on winning. So you don't want to waste the pitchers. But at the same time, like we see the landscape of Major League Baseball right now and we see guys that are getting hurt all the time. So let's get these guys some experience this year so that next year they can come in and really be ready to be Major League pitchers. So it doesn't need to be now, but like the second half of the season, Thorpe should be starting every week in Chicago. Like he really just needs to be.
I can't argue with any of that. But Drew Thorpe isn't even the only guy that's killing it at that team right now. I mean, their entire pitching staff is it's incredible what that entire staff is doing right now. Each one of those pitchers in their starting rotation, every time they go out, it gives the team a chance to win. Yeah. So, I mean, really get all five of them are pretty consensusly in every White Sox top 30 prospect list that you see. Who, other than Drew Thorpe, which member of this pitching staff has impressed you the most?
It's really hard to pick one because the answer is all of them, right? Like it's like 20, all five of these guys, this rotation has 5 pitchers and all made 5 starts now in 25 games, right? 28 strikeouts or more for each pitcher. All 5 of these guys have at least 28 strikeouts in their 5 starts to start the season, right? So this is not just the Thorpe show, right? Like it's everybody. The first one that I think just jumps out because I hadn't seen much of him before this year is Iriarte, right? The second piece in that Cease trade. Iriarte is someone who it's a command thing. Like if he's commanding his pitches, this is one of the best pitchers in minor league baseball. Like when he is on his stuff and he's able to limit the walks, it's really hard to touch the guy. Like 12 walks, right, has been like the one like drawback I'd say, right? But it's looked better lately, honestly. But his 12 walks is the one like slight thing you can point to as an issue per se. But like 17 hits total allowed in almost 25 innings now for Iriarte, right? So like nobody's touching him. He hasn't given up a single home run. He's given up, I'm pretty sure he's only given up like 3 like hard hits this entire season. So this is a guy who's not getting hit at all. The stuff is great. The fastball has a ton of depth to it. The slider is one of the better sliders in the system right now. And it's just a command thing. If Iriarte can start to locate a little bit more consistently and not just like, oh, don't walk guys, but like if he can find his spots a little bit more precisely, especially with the slider and the changeup, like they've both shown elements, but I think both those pitches are still not quite finding the exact spots he wants them to, which is why there's a little bit of walks and why he makes a few mistakes over the middle. But like when he's commanding, the stuff is so impressive. And it's lively. It moves well. He's the youngest guy in this rotation by 2 years, almost a year, a little under 2 years, right? So like this guy's 22. He's going to be 22 for a while still, right? So this is someone who is just, the upside is there. And I think maybe, he gets a promotion late in the season, but like the majority of the season spent in Double-A for Iriarte is going to set him up to be a key piece of this team come 2025.
Yep. He's been crazy. And the good thing with Iriarte too is that even if he can't improve on the command, like that's a high leverage bullpen piece waiting to happen. If worst case scenario happens and he can't stick in the rotation, I think he can definitely develop into a rotation piece.
I do too.
Honestly, I think he's going to start cracking some top 100 lists soon if he keeps this up.
He not to plug myself too much, but Just Baseball, which is I help out with, like their top 100, he's already on it. So there's more. He's going to start popping up more and more, and I think he's someone that looks great. And what's hilarious is he has the third best ERA before yesterday. Now he has the second best, but before yesterday he had the third best ERA on the team. That's what's just the craziest thing about it. And this is a guy who didn't give up a run in his first 3 starts of the season. So it's just it goes beyond, right? And then you get to the next 3 with Mason Adams, Kai Bush, and Jake Eater, who are all older prospects, all guys that either had pedigree but have struggled a little bit with injuries in the case of Bush and Eater, or a guy like Adams who came out of nowhere last year and just from a 13th rounder looks phenomenal. And each one of them has shown things in their own right that makes them look like professional pitchers and guys that are going to be major league pieces. And that's what's so impressive about the system right now is the pitching depth just runs really, really deep.
Yeah, it's much different than past years where there was just zero depth in this organization, where now you've got all these guys, Adams, Kai Bush, Jake Eater, who a lot of people gave up on Jake Eater, but I mean, the ERA is a little inflated, but the advanced numbers say he should be pitching a lot better, and the strikeout to walk rate is the best of his minor league career.
Yeah.
Kai Bush has really improved on what he did last year too. Like he struggled a little bit last year, but this year he's been awesome. And just the amount of depth that we have in this system is crazy.
And highlighting Adams for a second here, because I think that's probably the name that people don't know the most. He's the least well known by far of this 5 guys, and understandably, right? 13th rounder. Adams has 36 strikeouts and 3 walks this season. 3 walks to 36 strikeouts. His command is on a level that I don't remember seeing it from a guy that's that late of a draft pick in quite some time, if not ever in my time following prospects, right? Like he's got the same whip as Drew Thorpe. He's got a .01 higher whip than Drew Thorpe. And the ERA looks rough because he's given up 4 home runs. Like the home runs are the only issue for Adams. It's been a few balls he's left over the middle that have got taken deep, a few fastballs especially, right? And that's the only blemish on his numbers this year. Aside from those 4 home runs, has really given up nothing. He doesn't walk anybody. He pinpoints his stuff all over the zone. He wipes out people with the slider. He wipes out people with the fastballs high in the zone too. So he's got multiple things he can strike people out on. His strikeout rate's crazy high. He doesn't walk anybody. And it's really the only thing that he's done wrong is just left a few pitches over the middle here and there, which again, this is his second professional season. It's going to happen. And he's in Double-A, right? This is a guy who spent most of the year in Kannapolis last year and is now a key piece of the rotation in Birmingham. So, and Adams is, of these guys, being by far the least well-known name, has been just as good as all these guys. So it's it runs deep right now. And this entire rotation, it's if you're a team going into a series with Birmingham, you're looking at the schedule and there's no game where you can be like, oh, we got a little bit of a nice matchup today. No, every single day you're facing this team, you're going to struggle hitting the starting pitcher.
Yeah, Adams is the one I'm still kicking myself onto because I had him at 31 or 32 on my top 30 prospect list. So
yeah.
I was sleeping on him a little bit, partially because he just hadn't really shown that he could stick at this level against upper minor league teams because he was a little more advanced age-wise first line of competition. So I was sleeping on him a little bit. And now I'm kicking myself because he has been awesome this year, along with the rest of the pitching staff.
Yeah, he's been great. I remember putting him. I think I had him in the low 20s of mine, and he's gonna be pushing my top 15 come midseason. The way he's pitching right now, which might sound aggressive, but this guy's command is on another level. I really don't think there's many pitchers in Double-A baseball that can command the way he does, and it's another high 4 guy, and that's something that I don't think. It's not a bad thing, right? I think people love the idea of this elite ceiling, and that's a guy like Uriarte where you can see a world where Uriarte just dominates, right? But guys like Drew Thorpe, guys like Mason Adams at a lower level than Drew Thorpe, he's gonna be solid. He's the way, if you're commanding at the level he's commanding, you can find a way to get some quality innings out of pitchers like that, whether it's in the bullpen as a long reliever, whether they stick as a starter in the back of the rotation, right? Having guys that are just steady quality arms is a great thing to have.
It's the mix of pitching that we have in this system is incredible. It's so refreshing after the last few years and just seeing how much depth there is just in this organization. It's
100%.
We're going on the right track finally. It's great to see.
Definitely.
We've been talking about the pitching staff for so long. I think we need to start talking about the lineup too, because the lineup's been pretty impressive as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, who have you been watching that's really impressed you in this lineup? I mean, there's like five different options. Obviously, we can't talk about Ramos anymore because he just got promoted, but that lineup is not lacking firepower. So, who's
Not at
impressed you
all.
the most of those guys?
So obviously everyone's aware of Edgar Caro. I think that's the one we're aware of. He slumped a little bit in the last week or so, but Caro is kind of reached a level of like last year. It was like he's really young for Double-A baseball. He got pushed. It was an aggressive push by the Angels. Came over to the White Sox. He stayed at that level. He held his own. He was good towards the end of the season. But at the same time, it was like this guy's still really young. He was 20 years old at Double-A, trying to figure out the catching position still. And now you see a guy who looks more comfortable. He looks more nuanced at the plate. He's finding his counts. He's kind of tapping into that power more. He's been leading Double-A. He's been leading the Southern League in RBIs the entire season, I think, and pretty sure he still is now. This is someone who's just finding his groove. And then really what's crazy is that as solid as Caro has been, there's two hitters on this team that have been by far the best hitters on the team and have just been outright great. One of them is someone that I know you and I have talked about before. We both have him ranked way higher than the consensus, and that's Wilfred Veras. Wilfred Veras can mash. This is a guy who he needs to work on the approach. Like I will say that outright first, right? That is, we all know that. We've seen it. Like he strikes out way too much. He still chases at a lot of pitches. But when that guy finds his pitch and makes contact, the ball is going somewhere and it's going to be hit very hard and it's going to go far because he's got that type of raw power and he taps into it and knows how to use his strength to the best of his ability. It's such easy power, and it's not just home run power. It's drive the ball all over power, right? Like this is a guy who can just hit line drives into the gap any given at bat. And that's something that we don't really have that many just powerful upside hitters in the system right now. And Veras is exactly that. If he figures out a little more of an approach, right? Like this guy's super young still. Veras is 21 and he's going to be 21 this entire season. So for a guy who's that age and still has so much time to grow, he is an exceptionally talented hitter in many different ways.
Yeah, I know. I remember we were talking about him, and I asked you outright, like, am I crazy for thinking that he's a top 10 prospect in this organization? She's like, no, literally, I have him at 11, so that's not crazy at all. It's wild how people are sleeping on him. Like, I think MLB Pipeline has him in the mid-20s on their top 30 list, and it surprises me so much because, first of all, he's pretty young for the level that he's at. He's only
Definitely.
21 or 22 years
21,
old, so he's younger than the average age in Double-A.
Yep.
He's got arguably the most raw power in the system, maybe aside from George Wolkow. But like other than that, he might have the most raw power in this system. You're right. The approach needs some work. I think he's only drawn like 3 or 4 walks.
2 walks. Yeah.
2 walks. Jeez.
Yeah.
And he strikes out a little more than you'd like to see, but
sure.
There's so much upside with that bat that it's crazy.
Yeah.
And along with that, he went in one offseason, he went from a guy that was destined to be a first base DH type to working his butt off to transition to an outfield spot, which I know was going to have a bunch of White Sox fans up in arms about another first baseman playing in the outfield. But he's done it relatively successfully well. I mean, he's not going to win any Gold Gloves anytime soon.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to try to say that he's an above average glove out there. But you stick him in left field, he can at least play a competent left or right field. He's got a good arm out there.
The arm's good, yeah.
He's transitioned himself into at least competent defensively, which that alone gives him a ton more value if you don't just have to use a DH spot on him. And I don't know.
Yeah, it's upside, right? Like I get why he's ranked lower than both of us have him because of the approach. Like it is bad. Like it's not a great approach and it needs some work. And the defense is still a work in progress. The arm is good, which helps. So I think you can survive in a corner outfield if you have a solid arm and decent athleticism, which he does have. Like he's not a slow guy. He moves well for a big dude. It's really just the reflexes and just the reaction time that just needs some fine tuning, right? But it's a bat to dream on, right? And then on the flip side of things, if you don't mind to transition into the other player that I was mentioning at the top of this lineup, right? Then you've got the total opposite kind of profile per se with a Brooks Baldwin, who has just been unbelievably impressive this season to me. I liked what I saw from him last year, but this year's been a whole nother level. This is a guy who I didn't even think would be in Birmingham. I thought he was going to be in Winston, but clearly the organization likes him enough. And with Colson going to Charlotte, it opened up that shortstop spot in Birmingham. And they were like, hey, let's just put Brooks Baldwin in Birmingham and see if he's going to survive. And not only has he survived, he has been probably the best hitter in all of the Southern League, all of Double-A possibly. Like, this is a guy who just won hitter of the month in Birmingham, right? So this is, I mean, Baldwin is such a talented, impressive mix of a player because he plays all over the field. He's playing shortstop at a pretty good level, but this is someone who has played second base, he's played third base, he's played all over the outfield. He can literally play anywhere. So you've got a Swiss Army knife on defense who looks good on defense, and his hit tool is just insane. Like, this guy's ability to just make contact and hit the line drives just consistently. It's not a ton of power, right? One home run, like, you're not getting 20 home runs from this guy, but you're going to get a really, really good contact hitter who can play all over the field, who can run 4 stolen bases, right? Who can walk a little, 9 walks this season, and who just gives you a good at bat and puts a solid swing on the ball every time he comes up to the plate. And that's something that we don't have a lot of in the organization, and we really need, and the White Sox need to see that at the major league level. So Baldwin is someone who has taken an aggressive assignment and ran with it. And now you're looking at a guy who I think will be in Charlotte at some point this season.
Yeah. I mean, at one point he led, I know he might still lead all Double-A in WRC plus. At one point it was like over
it was 220. Yeah, it was crazy.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like you said, this guy just kind of came out of nowhere and is playing alongside top prospects like Edgar Quiero and Brian Ramos, and he's outperforming all of them. It's crazy that this lineup as a whole has been fantastic.
And what's the funny thing to mention about this lineup, right, is like, this lineup has not had good performances from some of their best hitters, right? Like, Ramos pre-promotion was really struggling until the last week, like we mentioned. Temelko has not looked like, what we saw last year. Jacob Burke has really struggled in his first stint of Double-A. Also an aggressive assignment for Burke. I like Burke a lot going forward, but it is an aggressive assignment, right? Michael Turner hasn't done a ton after being really good last year in Winston. So this is a lineup that, like, has really only gotten production from their top 5, top 4 even, because Terrell Tatum's also been very good. So, Tatum, Baldwin, Caro, and Varys have been that top 4. Those have really only been the consistent producers, and the lineup has still been good. So that's what's crazy about this lineup in Beham, is like, it could be even better soon. And that's just wild to dream on.
Yeah. Like you said, Tatum's been really good this year as well, and it just shows how deep this lineup is that we barely even had time to even talk about him, despite him being one of the better players on this team as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's about all the time we've got, Elijah, but thank you so much for joining me. Sure. I want to give you a chance to plug to our listeners where they can follow you, because to everyone listening, trust me, you need to follow Elijah. He's one of the most knowledgeable people about the White Sox system that I talk to. He's just a phenomenal follow. He kills it with the interviews. So please tell everyone where they can find all your stuff.
Thank you. First of all, you also are in the same boat as me in that regard. You can find me on Twitter at ElijahEV8. That's where I post kind of daily thoughts and everything that I'm just seeing, thinking, all the above. And then the Future Sox page, Future Sox podcast, is on me. I do the Future Sox roundup once a week, as well as interviews with players, just a variety of, try to get as many prospects as possible on to just get to share things about their pitching and their hitting, but also just, themselves, right? It's cool. My goal is always to try and let players, personalities shine to a degree, right? That's one of the most underrated things about people and baseball prospecting, right? Like, the human being matters. That's one of my big things. So if you want to check out those interviews, are definitely some of the coolest stuff I do. And I appreciate anybody who checks out the content for sure.
Elijah, this has been a extremely fun conversation.
Yeah,
thank you one more time for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. It was a blast.
Thank you again to Elijah Evans for joining us on the show today. It was a great conversation to highlight everyone to look out for at the Double-A Birmingham Barons roster. There's way too many. We probably could have talked for another half hour just about that team alone. That team is absolutely stacked right now. But moving on, the couple guys who aren't on the Birmingham Barons roster are the top 2 prospects in the White Sox organization. First off, Colson Montgomery had a uneven first month of the AAA season. He's a guy who hasn't had a ton of at-bats at the Double-A level, so an adjustment period was always going to be needed for him. But as of late, he's really been turning it on. He's hit 2 home runs in the last 4 games. He's starting to cut down on the strikeouts and getting back to his on-base skills of drawing more walks. And the raw power this year is really starting to show up in game, which has been one of the bigger critiques about Colson Montgomery. Is his approach at the plate has been phenomenal, but we're not seeing that 60, 65 grade raw power that scouts are saying he has in him. Well, this year, whenever he hits a home run, it seems like it's going at least 110 miles an hour off the bat, and it's getting crushed for 420 plus feet. I mean, he's absolutely demolishing the ball when he gets a hold of it. And just again, overall, over the last week or so, he's starting to calm down his approach, kind of get back to his old ways while maintaining that power. So there's no need to worry about Colson Montgomery. He's a top 10 prospect in all of baseball for a reason, and he's going to be just fine throughout the rest of the season. And Noah Schultz, the White Sox are doing something interesting with Schultz this year. Instead of the traditional taking the ball every 5 games, they are giving him more of a college-like workload where he is the designated pitcher every Saturday game for the Winston-Salem Dash. So it's a good system to use to allow him to rest his arm a little bit more in between starts while still working up his pitch and innings count this season. And I think the goal is probably to get him to at least 80 innings this year. I mean, last year he only pitched 27 before he was shut down, and his senior year of high school got cut short because of illnesses. So they're playing it cautious with him. But when he's on the mound, he is just as electric as he was last year. The ERA is a little inflated. It's just a tick above 4, but all the field independent stats show that his ERA should be in the low 2s. And his strikeout to walk ratio is just insane. He's averaging 5.5 walks for every, he's averaging 5.5 strikeouts for every walk that he gives up, which is just a crazy rate. He's striking out over 15 batters per 9 innings. He's walking less than 3 batters per 9 innings. So it just continues to amaze me the level of command he has with his 6'9" frame. The fact that he's able to keep all of his limbs, in conjunction with each other and just keep one fluid motion in his delivery. It's crazy to see. And his velocity's been up this year. He's been clocked at 97 miles an hour with his fastball a bit more often, which, coming in from high school, he was averaging more around 93, 94. So we're seeing a bit more velocity paired with the crazy spin and movement on his breaking pitches. And he's really getting into that conversation of, is he the best left-handed pitching prospect in all of baseball? You can make the argument that he is right now. And then before we end today's show, the Arizona Complex League has started up, and the Chicago White Sox have some names that you need to know if you're following the system. First of all, the biggest guy on this roster, both in terms of actual physical size and prospect pedigree, is George Wolkow, the 7th round pick from last year, but he was signed to a $1 million signing bonus, which is much more equivalent to early 3rd round money. He's a guy, he's only 18 this year. He was drafted when he was 17 years old. He reclassified in high school to be draft eligible a year early. So he's right around the age that you would see a lot of international signings when they make their stateside debut. Usually they're about 17, 18 years old. So George Wolkow's kind of on that same developmental plan right now. So he is going to be joining the Arizona Complex League. We'll see, maybe if he does well enough, he will earn a spot on the Kannapolis team after the season's over in July. That remains to be seen, but this is a guy that has probably the most raw power in the entire system. And we were just talking about it with Elijah. That's, if Wilfred Veras doesn't have the most raw power, it's probably George Wolkow. He's got so much upside with that bat. Obviously, we haven't seen a lot of him yet, but this is going to be a good first professional test for him to get some regular at-bats at the Complex League, see what he can do. But he is one of the most exciting prospects in this system, so it'll be great to see what he does this season. And then another name to know, he was the biggest breakout prospect in the Dominican Summer League last year, and that might not just be related to the White Sox. That might be throughout all of MLB, is Javier Mogollon, who we signed him for just a $75,000 signing bonus out of Venezuela. He was mentioned by some outlets like Baseball America as an under-the-radar international signing to keep tabs on coming into the season. But what he did in his first professional season was absurd. This guy had 10 home runs and 11 stolen bases in just 200 at-bats, had over 300 batting average, over 1,000 OPS, and to top it all off, he walked just about as much as he struck out last year. Guy showed off some crazy plate discipline along with putting up these crazy stats. Now, a lot of White Sox fans will remember all of the Benjamin Bailey hype a few years ago when he was the big breakout Dominican Summer League prospect who had crazy tools and was putting up these numbers. And then he came stateside, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to keep that up. So obviously, it's a big step for any international prospect to make their stateside debut. So I don't want to put too much optimism into one prospect because we really don't know what he is as a prospect yet. We're not going to really know much until we see him this year. But he's off to a fantastic start to his minor league career. He is absolutely one of the biggest guys to keep an eye on in the complex league this year. He's another one that if he keeps these stats up, it's going to be hard for the White Sox to keep him off of the Kannapolis roster eventually. So we'll see how he does this year in his debut playing in Arizona, but he's definitely an exciting one to keep tabs on. And then finally, Ryan Burroughs, who most reported was slated to start the year in Kannapolis this year. Apparently he was dealing with an injury in his hand or his arm, kind of delayed his season debut. So he will be joining the Complex League, or at least he's listed on the Complex League's roster right now. We'll see how long he lasts in the Complex League. It could be that they're just going to treat it more like a rehab assignment and just get him a week or so in there to get caught back up before he finally joins the Kannapolis Cannonballers in his full season debut. But he's another guy to keep an eye on. He's on pretty much every White Sox top 30 prospect list you can think of. He really broke out in the Dominican Summer League. Last year, his stats dipped a little bit, making his debut in the Complex League, but he was still rock solid. There's a lot of projection with him. He's incredibly athletic shortstop, big frame, has 20 home run stolen base potential when it's all said and done. We'll see if he can turn that potential into production, but he is absolutely another name to keep an eye on as this Complex League gets started here. All right, and that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us at the Pipeline to 35th. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Sox On 35th and follow the Sox On 35th podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Michael Suareo. I cover the White Sox farm system, and thank you so much for joining us for the next episode. Looking forward to what we see this next month and recapping it all with you guys in June.